Hey there, in my recent video I covered camera crop factor and I featured a honey bottle which inspired me for simulating and rendering honey. In the beginning of the video I'm going to explain the process in simple steps. This way you won't have to watch the full video if you are familiar with the simulation and rendering honey and sampling. But I also thought that the subject of honey, given how much transmission, diffuse, subsurface scatter is involved in the process, it would be a great subject for sampling your render. So I covered that, although I did not touch on light sampling since I covered it in previous video. However, I did touch on utilizing render passes as a strategic way to figure out where the heck our noise in Arnold in Maya are coming from. Is it coming from diffuse? Is it coming from specular? Is it coming from transmission, subsurface scatter? So this way you can have full control over your sampling and render in the most efficient ways. Alright, so this is the final render. As you can see, this is not the most accurate simulation, however, it is the easiest simulation to make in Maya. The geometry here, the simulated honey, that is going to be your nucleus cloth simulation, which means in the effects, you go into in cloth, and then that's going to be in cloth, and then you change the presets later. The yellow cap here must be a passive collider, otherwise the honey is gonna go through it like thin air. So this is your in-cloth simulation and this is your passive collider, and that's all you need to know. Let's start from the overview. Right now we're looking at this ball that is a sky dome lighting in Arnold, which is right here. And the sky dome here is critical because honey is transmissive, so not only do we get realistic lighting, but also realistic reflections. The reason why it's really important to make those details, like this hole here, is for the geometry here to simulate through. So after you're done with the modeling, you select the volume of honey, and then you go into the effects tab. Then you go into N cloth. N stands for nucleus. So you go to nucleus cloth and then create N cloth. After you do that, go to the N cloth shape 1. Then you go to the presets and then you choose honey. Yes, there is a preset for simulation for honey. I did some tweaking just to make it behave and reflect on the viscosity the way I wanted it. But even with the basic presets, you get some really good results. But of course, if you hit play, it's not going to collide with this object. So the next step for you is to go into also in cloth, but this time create passive collider, which means this object is not going to move. However, this simulated object is going to acknowledge this other piece of geometry. And the result, I'm going to play it from up to show you exactly what's happening. You see here the wrinkles. This is where it really ruins the result, because again, this is not the best way to simulate liquids. It is simulating that geometry, and it has to really shrink and move based on the amount of geometry that you have on that body. Of course, it would be a lot more realistic if you have more subdivisions. Now, check this out. It looks hideous. It looks nothing like honey, but my goal is not to get to this point. Please keep in mind that even in real-life photography, there's a lot of fakeness that take place, meaning when they photograph ice cream, they don't actually photograph ice cream. They photograph mashed potatoes. Yeah, because it holds the shape a lot longer, it doesn't melt, and they have a lot more control over it. So we do the same thing in 3D. It's all about making things believable. I'm gonna hit play, and this is what I want. From this point, where do we go? Well, you select the object that you want to make as honey, and then in Arnold in Maya you go and apply standard surface, and after you do that you need to go into the materials setup, and if you go to the presets, there's actually a whole bunch of really cool presets: blood, bubble, ceramic, clay, and including honey. Alright, so now that it's simulated, it's a matter of framing the camera and with a little bit of an angle. And before I render this result, I want to show you one more thing. I'm going to select on that sky dome. See that number here? By default, it's set to 1, which means, check this out. By default, that 360 image shows in the render. And I am only using this sky dome, as I mentioned at the beginning, only for the purpose of making realistic lighting and reflections. I do not want it to be in the background because it doesn't really fit the subject matter. So I'm going to drop it down to 0, meaning it's going to have 0 visibility on the camera. Activating the resolution gate allows me to frame the image exactly as I want it to be. So this would be the end of part 1. Editing is taking a long time and I need to take a break. In part 2, I'm going to cover the rendering process, the AOVs, render passes. Have a nice day.